Christine and welcome to my knitting room. Today's January 1st, 2022, so Happy New Year everybody. And today we are having a heck of a blizzard in our area, so it's a good day to put on the flannels and cozy up with some knitting. Today I'm going to show you 3 easy hand manipulated lace techniques that you can do on any flatbed machine. And I'm going to be using my LK150 here, but any flatbed machine will do. I tend to use worsted weight and bulkier weight yarns, so I'm typically working on the LK or on my Brother 260, and since neither of those has a lace carriage, I look for easy lace patterns that I can do using just a transfer tool. So I'm going to show you 3 of those today. The very first one I'm going to show you is a 3-prong tool lace, which is very simple and straightforward. You do all of your manipulating with your simple your hand transfer tool that has 3 prongs on one side and 2 on the other. And the nice thing about this pattern is your transfers all line up at the same place, so it's very easy to keep track of. This pattern is free. You can just Google 3-prong tool lace and it'll come up immediately. The most common one that comes up is by Magic Pixie Knitter. I'm showing it here. And she has instructions as well as a chart. So since this is the first one that comes up, I want to point out to you that there is a mistake in the chart, unfortunately, but it's not insurmountable. Okay, we'll just zoom in on this a little bit. You can see that she has shown her yarn overs here where there's a transfer of stitches to the left or right. But on the ends, she hasn't shown where to transfer those to. So what we're going to do is we're going to just mark this. And we're going to be moving 2 stitches over here to the right. And over here, we're going to take these 2 stitches and move them to the left. What we also know from looking at this chart is that it is in multiples of 9. So you have 9 stitches that form your lace section, and you have 4 stitches on either end. So this is going to be a multiple of 9 plus 8. So I know that for my scarf that I intend to make, I want to have 3 lace sections, and plus the 4 on either side is 8. So my total is going to be 35 stitches. For this particular project, I have some Caron Simply Soft in a really lovely shade of red here. I already know from working with it that it has a lovely drape that's perfect for scarves, especially a nice lace scarf. And I'm going to be working with it on tension 8 on my carriage, and at my upper tension will be at tension 7. So for my 35 stitches, I have selected needle 17 left through 18 right. And I'm going to go ahead and do a crochet cast on. You can use any cast on that you like. This one happens to be my favorite because it gives me a nice firm edge. If you don't know how to do this, there's plenty of tutorials online. And I'm going to crochet onto all of my stitches. Thread up my carriage. I'm going to knit 1 row to the left. That first one can be a little stiff, no matter how hard you try to keep it loose. And then I'll hang my weight. And anytime you're doing any kind of open work, lace work, anything with hand transferring, you're going to want to have as much weight on there as possible to make sure that they transfer nicely. And then I will knit one row back to the right. And now it's time to set up our first row. So as I mentioned, in our 4 stitches on either end, we have 2 stitches that we have to move over to the edge. So using my transfer tool with the 2 prongs, I'm going to just take number 2 and 3 and move them over to the right. Oops. And then on this side, I'm going to take the 2nd and 3rd from the edge and move them one to the left. Then to set up our 3-prong section, we know that after the 4th stitch here we have 9. We're going to skip 1, so that one, and we're going to take 3 and move them over to the left. So just to double check, I have my 4 edge stitches. I'm skipping that first one and I'm taking 3 and moving them over to the left. Then I'm taking the next 3 and moving them 1 to the right. So now what we have are 3 stitches on this one center of the 9 stitches. And then we see that there are actually 2 plain knit stitches in between the 2 transferred sections. So I'm going to skip 1, 2, take the next 3 and move them to the left. The next 3 and move them 1 to the right. And then I'm going to skip 2. Three to the left, 3 to the right, giving me a little trouble there. Okay. And that's that. Now to get our nice lace overs, we're going to move all our empty needles forward. And knit 1 row. And then we see from our chart that the next row is plain. So we then knit 1 row back. Another nice thing about this pattern is that you have 1 row that you don't have to do any work on. Okay, let's get in a little closer and see that again. I am, according to my chart, taking my 2nd and 3rd stitches and moving them over. On both ends. And I want to give you a few general tips if you're new to transferring lots of stitches like this. Okay, I'm skipping 2, I'm going to the next 3. It helps if you put your finger up against the inside of the knitting like this. It just helps them transfer off nicer. And then I'm moving those 1 to the left. And then again, holding your finger up against there just gives you a little extra insurance against dropping. And then you want to take your tool and really lift it up high so that it clears those hooks. And then we're going to do the next 3. I'm skipping 2, moving the next 3 to the left. Next group of 3 to the right. Skipping 2. And if you're working on a machine like Brothers that have gate pegs, you want to be very careful to not get caught. You want to make sure that your stitches are moving over without getting caught on those gate pegs. This is not the case with the LK150, but Brothers and other machines do have those. And the reason is if you get your yarn accidentally around the gate peg, you're going to find a few rows later that it isn't knitting, because the weight of the knitting is pulling that one piece of caught yarn and it's distorting the whole thing. So be careful about that. And then the other thing is, you can see that I have moved my carriage fairly far over to the right, and that's in order to transfer these stitches on the edge, just to give me a little bit more room. So normally when you're knitting, you don't go very far. You go only as far as you hear the little click that says you've completed the row, because you can see how this yarn has really pulled. So what happens is you can inadvertently get some slack here. You can see this is kind of forming a lot of slack, and my take-up spring isn't pulling it up adequately. So what I'm going to do is just manually pull this yarn up with my fingers until I'm not giving it any pull. I'm just pulling it up until I can feel that stitch has caught. I'm so much in the habit of it that I do pretty much on every row, regardless of what I'm knitting. Okay, so I am 30 rows in, and we're going to take a look at what we have so far. So we see our nice crochet cast on edge. You can see how nice and even and firm that is. And we have our sections, 3 sections of the 3-prong lace with our lovely eyelets in between from where we transferred stitches to the left and the right. And we have our columns of 2 plain knit stitches that we put in between each of these columns. So it has a very nice effect. Here, let's put something white behind it so you can see it better. But it is a nice open lacy piece. So I'm going to keep going. I'm going to do about 320 rows for a nice length of scarf, and I will show you that when it is done. Here is a close-up of my finished lace. I did steam block it lightly. And here is the finished scarf along with a little headband I made. And here I used it in a cowl that I made on my Brother 260 using Lion Brand landscape yarn, which is Aran weight. So this pattern really works up nice in a variety of yarns. So our last scarf was really nice to do because the way the eyelets and the columns stacked up, there wasn't a whole lot to think about it. It was the same every other row. And our next example is going to be the same, but it's going to be the same every row. And thus it is called the one-row scarf. It was originally a hand knitting pattern by a Ravelry user named Turvid. And a very good machine knitter you may be familiar with, Brenda translated it for doing it on the machine. And it is exactly what it says it is. You do the exact same thing on every row. So it's really easy and really fun. The pattern is free on Ravelry, so make sure you go find it and download it. And Brenda recommends using a lighter, like a lace weight yarn, with mohair. It makes the eyelets open up beautifully with that nice little halo on it, and doing it at a looser tension than you normally would. So I am using this Patton's lace weight sequin yarn that has a light amount of mohair to it. I'm going to turn it around a little bit and see if you can see the sparkles in it. So I'm excited to see how this sample turns out. This pattern is based across multiples of 4, so I have already cast on 28 needles and done 4 rows of just plain stockinette just to get me going. This is just a sample, I'm not doing a project yet. And then basically starting from the carriage side, you pull the 5th needle and every 4th needle out after that. And you can do that very easily with your 3x1 needle pusher. So I'm going to select starting with the 5th needle, I'm selecting every 4th one across. And then you transfer those stitches from the held needles to the adjacent needle away from the carriage. So I'm just going to move these over. You put all your needles back into work because you need those nice yarn overs, and then you knit 1 row. And I don't know if you can see on camera, but I have my nice little eyelets right there. So then you just repeat that over and over again. I'm starting from the 5th one, away from the carriage, and I am transferring these away from the carriage. You need to make sure you do that consistently. And again, 1, 2, 3, 4, starting with the 5th needle, selecting every 4th, and transferring away from the carriage. Fifth needle from the carriage side, transfer away from the carriage. Whoops. Okay, you can see what I did there? I forgot to put these back into work. No problem. If you do that, you're just going to go in, grab that passed over stitch, and hang it back on the hooks. It may look a little off at first, but it all comes out when you block it. Oop. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to work on this for a while until we get enough of a sample to show you. All right, here's my sample. This is about 15 rows of the lace section, and I've given this just a slight bit of steam, blocked it out a little bit. I'm going to move it around so hopefully you can see the sparkles. This is really lovely. The lace eyelets really opened up because of the way they're stacked kind of alternate, but on each row. So this is just the easiest thing in the world, just the same row over and over and over again, and you just get this beautiful result. I think with this nice little sparkle and a little bit of mohair, this would be a really lovely wrap or shawl for evening wear, or a bride, or anyone who wanted a little bit of luxury. Really turned out pretty. When looking at lace patterns, there are a couple of things to keep in mind for transforming them to machine knitting. First, is there patterning on one row or several rows? Are there many pattern repeat rows to keep track of? is there a purl row after every lace pattern row. That makes it a lot easier if you can just do your patterning on one row and then a purl pass back. The other thing is, how are the transferred stitches going to appear on your final knitting? Will there be a lot of purl stitches that have to be reformed? So there's a lot of things that you have to consider. And my third and final lace pattern for today is going to be a demonstration of some of that. This pattern is called the Java Summer Scarf. It is also free on Ravelry, and there are a few of these things that we can show here. The first thing I noticed when I chose this pattern was that there is patterning on one row and 3 rows with no patterning. So that made it pretty efficient knitting-wise when I only have to do patterning on one row and can do then 4 passes altogether. The other thing we notice on this, hopefully you can see from this picture, is that there are purl stitches on each row. If you are working on a machine with a ribber, you could put these columns of purl stitches on your ribber and they will be made automatically. So the good thing is that they are not sprinkled throughout the pattern, they line up in columns. So you could potentially put that on your ribber and just knit away. If you're working on a machine without a ribber, you have a couple of options. You could drop those stitches down and reform them manually with your latch hook. Or in this case, and what I'm going to choose to do is I'm going to leave one needle out of work for a mock purl. Now that means I'm going to have to change my chart just a little bit. So what I'm going to have to do for that is I am actually going to take one row out, one stitch out of the row, so that I'll have multiples of 6 instead of 7 that the original pattern says. And then I will take 2 of those stitches and leave them out of work on my machine. We'll see how that looks at the end. The other thing that we notice from this pattern is that the stitches have an embossed look to them. Now if I was to just transfer these stitches over on the back, you wouldn't get that effect. It would be smoother on top and you wouldn't get that nice embossed pattern on the front of your knitting. So we're going to show that in just a moment as well. The first thing I'm going to do is take the required stitches out of work, and from my pattern it is the third one over. I'm just going to take it out of work by putting it on the next stitch, and then every 6th stitch after that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I've previously cast it on multiples of 6 plus my 4 for the edges. Now we don't want these to knit anymore, so we're going to just leave them on the side like so. Now if I were doing this for a scarf, I'd want my edges to be the same. So I'm going to just take, just for demonstration purposes, pick up a loop of yarn and put it on that side so that, just so that I have it symmetrical. From our chart, we see that we have to move 1 stitch to the right and 1 stitch to the left. Now here's where it comes in a little bit of an extra step. So we see that that stitch has kind of an embossed look. And as I mentioned before, if I was to just take that stitch and move it over where it's supposed to go according to the chart, 1 to the right and 1 to the left with a knit stitch in the middle, I'm going to just get a flat piece on the knit side. So what you have to do first is take this stitch, move it over to the one that is going to be transferred so that it will be behind the stitch. So I am taking that stitch, moving it over behind the stitch that's going to appear on the front, and then move both of those over. I'm going to do it again here. Move that one that's behind, and then move them both over. And now you have to be a little bit careful because you don't want to bring your out of work needles back in accidentally, but you do want to bring in your transferred ones. And bear with me a second, I got a little drop there. So to repeat, I'm going to take these outer ones, move them over, and then move both of those over. Oop. Having some difficulty transferring here. Bringing those two back in. Put this one behind that one, and then move it over. This one behind this one, and then move it back over. Put those two back in. Behind, and then move. Behind, and then move. So now we see I have my little groups of 5 with a needle out of work in between. My needles that are part of the pattern are back into work, so they're going to form my yarn overs. And now I can knit 4 rows. I'm going to see if I can get in a little closer so you can see exactly what's going on here. You can see my stitches that are out of work that are going to form my mock pearls. You can see where I've transferred other stitches. And you can't see yet, but those stitches that are going to be embossed on the front need to first be moved to the front. So here's my group of 5 stitches. My eyelets are going to be here and here. But before I move those over, I'm going to take this stitch to put it behind the other stitch and then move it to its knitted position. So this one is going to go behind this stitch, and then they are moved to their knitted position. Now I'm going to have 2 more eyelets here, but I need to move those back into work. So let's do that again here. I'm moving that stitch behind, and this stitch behind this one, moving them back to their knitted position, and bringing in my needles for the eyelet row. So what happens then is that these 2 stitches that are actually being moved over are now going to be on the front of the knitting. Oops. Oops. My camera's getting in the way of my transfer tool. And now just double check. I got my groups of 5, and I'm going to do 4 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I'm going to do a few rows more off camera, and then we will take it off and see what we've got. So here is my sample. And you can see here that the stitches that I took out of work, or the needles that I took out of work, are making a nice little mock rib there and distinguishing the main part of my lace pattern, making it stand out a little bit more from the background. And you can also see where, having moved that inner stitch in front of the other stitch by taking this one and moving it behind it first and then moving it over, gives it a nice amount of definition. So if you were doing a diamond pattern or a leaf pattern where you needed those stitches to pop out a little bit more, you need to just think about the order in which you transfer them. So to illustrate that a little better, I made another sample where I did not transfer the stitches in that manner, and you can see I still have nice eyelets in the pattern that I want, but they are less distinct. Here they are side by side. I've given them a little bit of pressing just so that we can look at them a little closer. And as you can see, this one just has just a little bit more definition. This is still a pretty pattern, but as I said, if you want a leaf shape or a diamond shape that needs to be more distinct, just think in advance about how you want to lay out those transferred stitches. I used this lace pattern on another cowl that I made out of the Lion Brand Landscape. I did this one also on my Brother 260, and I used the ribber to form the purl stitches. That's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope it inspires you to get out your pattern books and stitch libraries and start looking at some lace that you might explore. Again, Happy New Year and happy knitting!